Dear students, welcome to another video session. In this video, we'll discuss about hypothesis, its characteristics, sources, and different types. So, if you see the introduction, hypothesis is an integral part of modern scientific research. It is otherwise called as a mental tool where the researcher predicts his results in advance. So, it is the principal instrument in a research project. It can be used as a tool to uncover the fact. Okay, so hypothesis is an integral part of modern scientific research, and it's a mental tool where the researcher uses it as an instrument or a tool to uncover the fact. So we will see what is the definition. The definition of the hypothesis is a statement of prediction of relationship between two or more variables. So whatever variables taking part in the research, if you predict a relationship between those two variables, we call it as a hypothesis. According to Pollitt, he defines the hypothesis as a statement of researchers' expectation about relationship between the variables under investigations. So the Pollitt says it as a researcher's expectation, and the other definition says it's the researcher's prediction of relationship. So this is a simple example of hypothesis that if I add fertilizer to my garden, then my plants will grow faster. So this is a the person's prediction that if you add fertilizer, the plants will go faster. So why we need hypothesis and what is the significance of hypothesis in research problem? It provides clarity to the research problems. It means with the research problem with hypothesis gives a clear idea of what the research is about. It describes, explains and predicts the expected outcome of the research. So it explains and predicts the outcome of the research. It develops and increases the thinking process. By writing hypothesis, the researcher thinks regarding his research and what will happen at the end of the research. So all this thinking process happens because he is writing an hypothesis. It provides direction to the research study, and it provides insight regarding the population, data collection, and data analysis. So, all over, hypothesis is a base or conclusion for research analysis. So, why we need hypothesis? Because it gives a clarity and it explains and predicts what the outcome of the research will be, and it increases the thinking process of the research, and it gives a direction to the research study, and it provides insight to the population, data collection, and data analysis. So what are the characteristics? When we talk about hypothesis characteristics, most of the characteristics matches the characteristics of objectives. Okay, so the characteristics of objectives are SMART. You remember that, I think. So what is SMART? Is simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. So almost same like this. The characteristic of hypothesis has to be clear and precise. It should be capable of testing, and it should give a relationship between variables, and it has limited scope. It is specific, simplicity, logical, realistic, factual. So all these things are a repetition of the characteristics of objective. The next is sources of hypothesis, and the sources include theories, observation from the researcher point of view, assumptions regarding his research studies, literature reviews, intuition, personal experience, previous studies experience, and continuity of research in the same field, that is field of experience. So these field of experience, previous studies, personal experience, intuition, literature, theories, all these things are as same like the sources of research problem. So most of the sources of hypothesis resembles the sources of research problem. So observation and assumptions are included as extra here. So you can remember the sources of research problem, and with the help of that you can write the sources of hypothesis. And what is the classification of hypothesis? This is a very important aspect in hypothesis or when you write hypothesis. So we can pair it like this: simple and complex hypothesis, null and research or alternate hypothesis, directional and non-directional hypothesis, causal and associative hypothesis. So we have 8 types of hypothesis, that is simple and complex, null and research, directional and non-directional, causal and associative hypothesis. We will look into it one by one. So what is a simple hypothesis? It predicts relationship between one independent variable and a dependent variable which is in the research. So the simple hypothesis talks about the prediction of relationship between one independent and one dependent variable. So here the example is 2-hourly position changing of a fully bedridden patient will prevent bed sore. Here the independent variable is 2-hourly position changing and dependent variable is bed sore. So it talks about the relationship between the position changing and the bed sore. So it is a simple hypothesis. What is complex hypothesis? Complex hypothesis predicts there will be a relationship between 2 or more independent and dependent variable. So here in this complex hypothesis, there will not be one independent and one dependent variable. There will be 2 or more independent and dependent variable. So the example here, for a fully bedridden patient, 2-hourly position changing, 2-hourly back care and high protein diet will build up body resistance, promote blood circulation and prevent bed sore. So here we can see the independent variables are 2-hourly position changing, 2-hourly back care and protein diet. So there are 3 independent variables, and the dependent variables are it builds up the body resistance, improves the blood circulation and prevents the bed sore. So there are 3 dependent variables and 3 independent variables. So it gives a relationship between 2 or more independent and dependent variables. So it is a complex hypothesis. So what is null hypothesis? It is also called a statistical hypothesis. In this type, the hypothesis is used to test statistically. Okay, so what is the prediction here? The null hypothesis predicts there is no relationship between independent and dependent variable. So in null hypothesis, there is no relationship exists between the independent and dependent variable. It is used to test statistically, so that is the reason it is called a statistical hypothesis. The example, nasogastric tube feeding and does not alter body temperature. Here there is no relationship between nasogastric tube feeding and the body temperature alteration. So the next one is research hypothesis. It is otherwise called as alternate hypothesis. It states the anticipated relationship between the variable present in research. So it is denoted as H1. So here clearly the researcher talks about the relationship between, or what he is predicting at the end of the research. So he gives a relationship between 2 variables which are taking part in the research. So the example is there will be a significant relationship between attitude and behavior of students in the classroom. So it is otherwise called as alternate hypothesis or research hypothesis. So the next pair of hypothesis types is directional and non-directional. So directional hypothesis predicts the direction of relationship between independent and dependent variable. When the researcher writes the relationship, he will give the adjective form of words in the directional hypothesis. For example, high quality of nursing education gives to high quality of nursing practice. So here the researcher has mentioned high quality, which gives the direction to this hypothesis. So he did not say nursing education and nursing practice. He has mentioned a high quality of nursing education and high quality of nursing practice skills. So here the direction has been given. So it is called directional hypothesis. The next one is non-directional hypothesis. So in the hypothesis, when the researcher writes it, he never give any direction in the variables. So non-directional hypothesis predicts relationship between independent and dependent variable but does not specific the direction of the relationship. For example, here teacher-student relationship influence students' learning, but he did not mention it whether it is positively influencing or negatively influencing. So this is called non-directional hypothesis. So if he is not mentioning what kind of relationship exists between these two, then it is called non-directional hypothesis. The next is causal hypothesis. So causal hypothesis predicts the relationship between independent and dependent variable, especially the cause and the effect. So it predicts a relationship between the cause and the effect. So we call it as hypothesis predicts the effect of the IDV on dependent variable. So it is called causal hypothesis because the relationship exists between the cause, that is the independent, and the dependent variable, which is the effect, is explained here. So early postoperative ambulation will lead to prompt recovery. It is an example of causal hypothesis. So the next one is associative hypothesis. In this hypothesis, it predicts the relationship between independent and dependent variable, but it will give a association, either a positive association or a negative association. For example, high quality of nursing education gives a high quality of a positive, or we can say the example as teacher student relationship influence a positive effect in the student learning process. So in this, the positive association is given, so we call it as a positive associative hypothesis. So if you give a negative association, then we call it as a negative associative hypothesis. For example, the decreased IPR will lead to decreased student performance in the examination. So this is a negative associative hypothesis. So we have discussed the types, simple and complex, null or statistical hypothesis, and research or alternative hypothesis, directional and non-directional, causal and associative hypothesis. We will move on to the criteria for statement of hypothesis. So how you should write hypothesis. All hypotheses should be written in a declarative sentence. It should be written in the present tense. That's why we always say there is a significant relationship. Okay, so it means there is a significant, it's a present tense. Contains population. So when you write hypothesis, you should write the population, that is where you are conducting the study, who is the people you are focusing. Should contain variables. Of course, you need two variable where you want to give relationship. Reflect the problem statement. When you write the problem statement, from the problem statement you should write the hypothesis. And of course, all the hypothesis which is written should be empirically tested. Okay, so what are the criteria when you write hypothesis? It should be a declarative sentence. It should be written in present tense. It should contain population or the sample, and it should contain variables, and it reflects the problem statement what you have written, and all the hypotheses which are written should be empirically tested. So we have discussed what is hypothesis, what is the definition, characteristics and sources, and different types of hypothesis, and how to write hypothesis. Okay, see you in another video. Thank you.